Thank you. The next item of business is a debate on motion 20653 in the name of Murdo Fraser on saving Scottish hospitality. I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Murdo Fraser to speak to and to move the motion up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today, pubs, hotels and restaurants across Scotland face a crisis situation due to rising costs and flat customer demand. The latest blow comes in the form of the 2026 revaluation, which hands down crippling increases in bills which are simply unaffordable. Today, the Scottish Conservatives are calling for real, positive and immediate action from this Scottish Government to prevent the meltdown of a sector that is so important to the Scottish economy. Now, Presiding Officer, the background to this is the difficult trading position that has hurt hospitality over a number of years. The rising cost of wages, not helped by Labour's tax on jobs in the form of employers' national insurance increases. Rising energy costs, the burden of non-domestic rates, and all this while customer demand is hit by cost of living pressures, meaning that prices cannot be increased to accommodate rising cost pressures. And on top of that, we now have the catastrophe that is the latest non-domestic rates revaluation. According to figures from the trade group UK Hospitality Scotland, the current revaluation will see the average pub in Scotland face a rates bill increase of £36,523 over the next 3 years, while for hotels the average increase is even greater at £68,007. If these increases go ahead, it will mean the end of many small pubs and hotels across the country. This is a potentially catastrophic situation for a vital sector. And already pubs in Scotland are suffering a closure rate more than 50% higher than their equivalents south of the border, with one pub a week forced to close throughout 2025. And it is only going to get worse. This is an economic issue because of the employment provided. But it is more than that, because pubs and hotels play a vital part in the tourist economy, but also act as a social hub for communities, particularly in rural areas. Too many rural communities over the years have seen the local school close, followed by the newsagent and the grocer's shop. Now the local church might be about to close its doors, and that just leaves the pub or the hotel as the last place where the community can gather, and even that is now under threat. Last week, the UK Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, announced a £100 million a year package of support for pubs south of the border, including a 15% cut in rates. That will generate Barnett consequentials for the Scottish Government, and we still await hearing from the Government exactly how that additional money will be spent. But that will not go far enough. In line with our colleagues in England, we want to see 100% rates relief for hospitality businesses with a rateable value below £100,000, covering the vast majority of small to medium-sized enterprises. But more urgently, there needs to be action on the current revaluation, delivering such staggering increases in rateable value from April. It is clear that the current methodology applied to assessing rateable values for hospitality is simply no longer fit for purpose, based as it is on projected turnover figures and taking no account of profitability. I'll give way to Mr Johnson.
I'm very grateful to the member for giving way. I wonder if he might agree with me that actually this isn't just about this sector. Actually, there's a fundamental problem with the lack of transparency about how rates RVs are arrived at for the whole of business and all businesses that are charged them, and there needs to be a fundamental review.
Murdo Fraser.
So I understand the point Mr Johnson is making. Our focus today very much is on hospitality, but I'm aware of other sectors, the self-catering sector, for example, small-scale hydro schemes, also affected by the revaluation. And I know the Scottish Government will say the assessors are independent and the work they do is independent, but the framework is set by Scottish Government, is in legislation. And the Scottish Government have themselves indicated a review of the methodology. I'll give way to Mr Carson.
Briefly, Mr Carson.
I've seen businesses in my constituency go out of business, but does the member agree with me and Tom Hunter that we should be banning every government minister from local pubs and hotels until this business rate situation is fixed?
Murdo Fraser.
Well, I'm a very generous man. I don't want to see anybody barred from their local establishment. But of course, that's in the hands of the Minister and the Cabinet Secretary themselves to do what Sir Tom Hunter has requested. And although they've indicated there will be a review of the methodology, which is very welcome, that's not going to conclude until the end of this year. And in any event, any change in methodology won't apply until the next revaluation cycle in 2029. That is simply too late. Scottish businesses cannot afford to wait that long. If the current revaluation is allowed to proceed, we will see a collapse in the sector. If I've got time, I'll go wait for Mr. Ewing.
Briefly, Mr. Ewing.
Yeah.
Does Mr Fraser agree that the immediate solution is to do what Northern Ireland did, announced on the 29th of January, which is to postpone the revaluation now?
Murdo Fraser.
I absolutely agree with Mr Ewing. That is exactly the point made in our motion today, because just last week, the Northern Irish Finance Minister, John O'Dowd, in response to concerns from the industry there, announced a pause in the revaluation affecting hospitality. So the coming year's rates from April will be calculated on the current valuation, and the pause will allow consideration of the revaluation system. And announcing the change, O'Dowd recognised that these were local businesses which were the backbone of local economies, and went on to say that, having listened carefully to the concerns raised with him and the Northern Irish Executive, it was only right and proper that the process be stopped at this stage. And that announcement was warmly welcomed by the sector in Northern Ireland, who gave the Minister credit for listening to their concerns. Now, Presiding Officer, if a Sinn Féin Finance Minister in Northern Ireland can take this action, why can't an SNP Finance Secretary in Scotland do the same? Does it not care about the fate of a vital tourist sector? Does it care less than Sinn Féin does for businesses in Northern Ireland? Presiding Officer, just on Monday, we saw the latest edition of the Scottish Business Monitor, published by the Fraser of Allender Institute, with more bad news for the Scottish economy, showing a strong sense of pessimism amongst the business community. 80% expect weak or very weak levels of growth in 2026. 80% say their costs have increased, with 90% expecting further rises. And a survey found a decline in levels of employment and weaker sales and revenue during the last quarter of 2025, which for retail and hospitality should be the busiest time of year. So, Presiding Officer, this situation could not be more serious. Scottish hospitality stands at a crossroads. If the SNP are not prepared to change direction, then the level of losses we will see in terms of folding businesses and lost jobs will be catastrophic. That is why the Scottish Conservatives have brought this debate to the Chamber today. We need action now, before it is too late. That is the point made in my motion today, which I am pleased to move.
Thank you, Mr Fraser. I now call on Minister Ivan McKee to speak to and move Amendment 20653.3. Up to 5 minutes, please.
I'd like to start with a quote. We welcome the move from 3-year to 5-year evaluations, which is supported by the business community. Quote by Murdo Fraser himself at Stage 1 debate in the Non-Domestic Rates Scotland Bill, when he said there was much in the bill that he welcomed. And at that point it was also welcomed, as I've indicated, widely by the business community. Presiding Officer, as members of this Parliament will be aware, the evaluation process is administered by Scottish assessors who are independent of Scottish Government and of local government. It is right that that is the case to maintain the process as it operates. The Scottish Government Scottish Budget 2026-27 responds to the expected outcome of the revaluation by decreasing the basic, the intermediate and the higher property rates for 2026-27, ensuring the lowest basic property rate since 2018-19, and supporting a package of reliefs to business worth an estimated £864 million in 2026-27 to reduce the very bills that Murdo Fraser is talking about as we debate this afternoon. As a result of the decisions in the budget, the revenues raised from non-domestic... Listen to this point, it's a very important point, puts this into the context of where we are today. As a result of the decisions in the budget, the revenues raised from non-domestic rates next year are expected to be 6% lower in real terms using CPI than pre-COVID. Despite the number of properties on the valuation roll increasing this time, we've got more businesses, despite what Murdo Fraser says, more businesses in the Scottish economy, and they're paying less rates than they did pre-COVID. Give way to Murdo Fraser.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and he has set out the broader context. But this debate is around hospitality. Yep. And the reliefs he has announced today will not touch the sides when it comes to addressing the black holes being created due to the current revaluation. What action is he going to take on the current revaluation? Will he do what Northern Ireland are currently doing?
Minister.
We are offering more than £320 million of support through transitional relief schemes and retail, hospitality and leisure relief over the next 3 years. Overall rateable value is expected to rise by 12%. That's 12% over 3 years at the 2026 revaluation. While some properties will see increases in rateable values at the 26 revaluation, over 40,000 properties will actually see a decrease. And revaluation transition relief will cap gross bill increases for those seeing the most significant increases. When he talks about the businesses with those large increases in their valuation, the reliefs are precisely in place to cap that and to prevent those businesses experiencing those level of increases. And I give way.
Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you for taking the intervention. Does the Minister recognise that the methodology for the valuation for hospitality businesses is entirely different to other businesses, which puts a pressure on them because of the high turnover and the low profitability?
Minister.
Yeah, and I should talk to assessors on that. Actually, I appreciate that. It's because of the lack of information from the sector to allow the assessors to be able to conduct the assessment in the same way. But that's precisely why, and I'll come on to talk about this, it's precisely why...
Members, let's hear the Minister.
It's precisely why we've recognised the calls from the sector to set up the independent commission that will look at this. BJ Gill, KC, Advocate Deputy, was appointed as chair of the review, and I confirmed the names earlier this week of the 4 members of the review group. And there will also be an advisory panel for the review, made up including members from the business community, and a call for evidence will issue shortly in that regard.
Briefly, Mr Johnson.
Could the Minister clarify that point? Because the last time I was responsible for providing the information, it was a legal obligation to provide the information for rating purposes. Is he saying that people aren't complying, or is the government just not exercising its powers?
Minister.
What I'm saying is that the assessors will work out on the information that they have available, and the different sectors that will be based on the information that's available for those sectors. So we'll continue with over 100,000 properties will remain eligible for a small business bonus scheme, which will continue to be the most generous of its kind in the UK. And thanks to the generous non-domestic rates relief package, we estimate that 96% of retail, hospitality and leisure businesses could benefit from some form of relief in 26-27. We recognise that, I think I've taken enough
Minister should be bringing his remarks to a close.
We recognise that thriving businesses are key to growing the economy, and we engage and communicate regularly with businesses as well as business representatives and trade organisations on a wide range of issues, including the Non-Domestic Rates Consultative Group, which I met immediately following the UK budget and the Scottish budget, and I'll meet again with them tomorrow, because we gave a commitment to them not only to pass on in full the consequentials coming from the UK Government's recent decision on NDR, but also to engage with that group to take their perspective and their views on how that money should be allocated to best support the sector. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, we absolutely recognise that economic growth is at the heart of the Scottish Government's agenda. We'll continue to take the right decisions to support businesses in Scotland, and we must not forget the important role that non-domestic rates revenue plays in funding the local services. And we heard much from Conservative members earlier on about those local services, in which we will rely, and the importance of regular revaluations to maintain the integrity of the NDR system. Thank you.
Minister, could you please move your motion?
And I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you very much. I now call on Daniel Johnson to speak to and to move Amendment 20653.2. Up to 4 minutes, please. I
move the amendment in my name, and I remind the Chamber of my register of interest, although it's some years since I've been responsible for paying non-domestic rates. And can I reflect on this? It is a great shame this Parliament doesn't sit on Mondays, because Monday was Groundhog Day. And here we are again, having the same debate, because this is an important issue, and we get barely a difference in nuance from the Minister. And I understand this is complex, and he's right to reflect upon the fact that this is revenue raised to pay for local services, but he also has to acknowledge the deep flaws that there are within the rate system and to acknowledge them and address them. Now, Kate Forbes, when she was the Finance Secretary, I thought was quite right to restate the Adam Smith principles and did so repeatedly, those of equity, certainty, convenience and economy. I think at least two of those are probably broken, certainly when it comes to hospitality and the rate system. And it's not just hospitality. And if the Chamber will indulge me a little, the problem is revaluations across many sectors just don't make sense. So Edinburgh Airport has had a 300% increase in its rateable value, whereas Glasgow Airport was just 50%. Prestwick, 39%. I would imagine the owners of Prestwick Airport might be taking that up with the assessors if that was the bill. And the explanation, and this is the important bit, the explanation from the assessors, first of all, is that it's different between different assessors, but they're explaining it on the basis of revenue. Now, it's not supposed to be on that basis. It's meant to be linked to rent, what a property could be rented out for. So the assessor is unilaterally changing the methodology and explaining that after the rates bill has arrived. But most critically, on that point of equity, and this is the fundamental issue with the rate system, is we have a system that does not correlate with the economic contributions of different sectors, with some sectors paying significantly more than the contribution they make to the overall economy. So, for example, retail, my old sector, has an economic contribution of 11%, but a 24% share of the rates bill. And hospitality is even worse. 3% GVA and 9% contribution to the rates bill. That's the fundamental issue here. So I accept the technicalities, I accept the complexity, I accept, in a sense, that the Minister has inherited a system. But the government actually is in a position to maybe change the system if they were to acknowledge the issues that exist, and which they seem to impart, but the problem is it's far too slow. But also, even within the existing system, the government simply is not being as generous as other parts of the United Kingdom. The UK Labour government is putting in place a £4.3 billion support package, capping increases for most small businesses with values under £100,000 to 15%. And I would be grateful, genuinely, because the government has previously made a commitment that we would examine the consequentials available. And if the Minister could explain how and where the government is bringing forward measures reflecting those Barnett consequentials, I'd be grateful.
And briefly, Minister, that members in the last 30 seconds.
I think I heard Daniel Johnson say that the UK Labour government is putting in a support package of £4.3 billion. The Scottish Government is putting in a support package of £864 million, which, if you scaled that up to the size of the UK economy, would be closer to £10 billion.
Daniel Johnson.
The reality is, for many hospitality businesses in particular, because of the caps and also critically the transitional reliefs, that package is going to make a measurable difference, which will be significantly different for comparable businesses north and south of the border. And do I need to sum up? Yes. So with that, I think the government has to acknowledge that this is a repeated issue in terms of a lack of transparency, a tax that doesn't reflect economic contribution, and the government must pause and undertake a radical review so that we do not hammer businesses that are the very lifeblood of many communities in Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Johnson. I now call on Willie Rennie to speak to and move Amendment 20653.1. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Before I forget, Deputy Presiding Officer, I'll move the amendment in my name. This is central to what this government is about, because when John Swinney became First Minister, he was determined to reset the relationship with business. And step by step, this government is undermining that commitment that the First Minister gave to the country. And this is just another example. Now, tourism and hospitality is an essential part of our advert to the world. I represent a part of the country that welcomes people from across the globe for its tourism offer in the East Neuk, to golf, to the wonderful countryside. But that is an advert that is under threat because of this government's reckless approach to taxation. Now, the Minister's right, there is a cumulative impact of a number of different issues, from increase in tax and energy costs, but also the scarcity of staff that has meant that many hospitality businesses have had to cut their hours. So it's already a sector that is under incredible strain. And this is through the tax increases that are coming with this. This is money out the door before they even open the door. And therefore, it is essential to build confidence in the sector by addressing this and addressing this quickly. Now, I do welcome the fact that the government did listen in the draft budget and put in extra compensatory measures to try and deal with some of the issues and the excesses of the revaluation. And I welcome that. It was something we raised in the budget discussions, and I'm sure others did as well, but I was pleased that that happened. But it's not touching the sides. There is much more that needs to be done if it's going to be meaningful. And it has to be meaningful. This isn't just a political offer. This has to be something that makes a difference to the bottom line of these businesses. Otherwise, they will not be here. They will not be here to serve as an advert to the world, which is why I want us to follow the steps of the Northern Ireland Executive, which is the central part of my amendment, and have a pause, just a pause for us to consider, to allow that structural review that I think is essential to happen. Because the Minister is right that the assessor is independent, the assessors are independent, but they're not lone wolves. They don't just decide it all by themselves. They do have a framework in which they need to operate within, whether it's the method, whether it's the framework, whether it's the timetable. All of that is a political decision upon which they operate. So they're not lone wolves, they are independent, but they need to be given clear guidance about what to do next. Yes, I'll take another.
Briefly, Mr Johnson.
I'm very grateful to the member for giving me. And would you reflect, if actually we can't do that, do we not then have a much more fundamental problem around transparency and accountability of the way that the system works?
Willie Rennie.
Absolutely. There are many people who are calling for much more radical reform around about the transparency issue for the assessors. Because I've had lots of interaction with the assessors in my part of the world, and I'm none the wiser at the end of the discussion than at the beginning as to what they actually are trying to do and how they've come up with these calculations. And I've challenged them over the years. You know, I'm maybe not, and I'm not qualified to be an assessor, but I would like to understand what they're about. And I just simply cannot understand. So therefore, there are many, including the likes of John McGlynn, who've argued for a much more radical reform of this process. And I think that's something we should consider. And a pause would give us that opportunity to do so. So let's look, in addition to the measures of the budgetary, the Barnett consequentials that have come through, hopefully as a result of the measures by the UK Government, which should go some way to dealing with the problem. We do need to look at proposals like the one that Conservatives have come forward with today, around about the 100% on the rateable values under 100,000. Measures like that need to seriously be considered, because we cannot keep going through this repeated knocking off the sector that happens periodically. We seem to be returning to this as a Groundhog Day on a repeated basis. So on that point, I will conclude and sum up at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Rennie. And I now call on Lorna Slater to open on behalf of the Scottish Greens. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It is less than a month since we had pretty much this exact same debate in the Chamber, and I didn't expect that we'd hear anything new today that we hadn't heard several times before. So I'm delighted to hear Willie Rennie call for radical reform. That is absolutely something the Scottish Greens could applaud. The Tories like to believe that lower taxes will magically create growth, conveniently forgetting that suddenly threatening to lower taxes, as Liz Truss did, panicked the markets, tanked the pound, and drove up mortgage costs. So, oops. Perhaps that is just because her tax cuts were unfunded. Well, Russell Finlay just last week at FMQs proposed that the way to pay for tax cuts was to reinstate the two-child cap on benefits. In the first 2 years of the two-child cap, that was 2017 and 2018, the Child Poverty Action Group said it pushed an additional 300,000 children into poverty. So I think that makes the Tories the only party in this chamber who are campaigning on increasing child poverty in the coming election.
Ms Slater, we are dealing with a debate about hospitality and rates issues.
Understood.
If we could get back to that.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Because if we want properly funded public services in Scotland, then we must need to raise those funds, and we do that through taxation. If we want Scandinavian levels of public services in Scotland, which from all the questions from parties across the chamber I think we do, we must be aware that we need to raise Scandinavian levels of taxes. And I wouldn't be the first to argue that the limited taxation powers we have in Scotland don't allow us to raise taxes as fairly as I would want. The UK reserves powers to tax wealth, carbon emissions, luxuries, air travel, inheritances and capital gains. Sorry, just let me finish my point. It's one of the reasons that I support Scottish independence. But I would also argue that we don't do enough with the tax powers that we have.
Ms Slater, please resume your seat for a second. As you know, I give a lot of latitude to members and what they say. But I'm looking at the motion and the amendments, and we really are supposed to be talking about the hospitality sector and the forthcoming non-domestic rates revaluation. Could you please address your remarks to that?
I absolutely think that our non-domestic rate system needs to be changed. For example, if we put a new band in place for properties over £1 million, that would raise a lot of money for things like Amazon distribution centres, massive, super profitable supermarkets, and we could be using that money to be offering more relief to small hospitality businesses. I will take the intervention from
Briefly, Mr Rennie.
To help Lorna Slater, would you put taxes on hospitality up or down?
Lorna Slater.
I support Willie Rennie's earlier proposal for radical reform on non-domestic rates. Because these are political choices that are being made. We could tax the wealthiest to support the little guy, balance the playing field between massive multi-corporations and small businesses. I've said it before. The regular re-evaluations of our rate system is a feature, not a bug. It is roughly a system of proportional taxation. Rates payers pay rates based on the value of their premises. So accurate valuation is really important. Just look at the mess our council tax system is in to see the distortions created by the failure to undertake regular re-evaluations and having everyone pay taxes on really out-of-date evaluations. Sorry, I must conclude. The re-evaluation that is being undertaken simply reflects increases to the rateable values of properties. It's a sound principle that as the relative wealth of a business increases through the effect of inflation on property prices, so too does their contribution. In practice, though, the NDR system does disproportionately benefit the owners of premises and disadvantages the tenants of premises. It lets big businesses off the hook and makes life difficult for small businesses, and that does need fixing.
Thank you, Ms Slater. We now move to the open debate. Backbench speeches of up to 4 minutes. There's no time in hand. Any interventions, therefore, would have to be absorbed within the members' agreed speaking allocation. And I would also invite those members who have not yet pressed to please press the request to speak buttons if they wish to speak. And I call Jamie Halker-Johnson, followed by Claire Adamson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm not quite sure what that last contribution was actually relating to, but I'm sure it looked good on the computer. Thank you, Presiding Officer. As MSPs visiting businesses large and small, we hear from employees and employers alike, talk to the people delivering public services in our areas and meet with the organisations and groups that keep our constituencies and regions functioning. And I'm sure we all, across this chamber, have those experiences, which is why I can't understand that there will be members sitting in this chamber, obviously not SNP members sitting in this chamber, there's hardly any of them here, who believe that the consequences of this rates revaluation are something that the businesses in their area can just absorb. How can they possibly believe that many of their local shops or pubs or hotels or cafes are in a place right now to meet and accept the sort of shock that this revaluation represents to many? Have they not heard the concerns of those who have been assessed? Those people who simply cannot fathom how the methodology employed could possibly arrive at the figures they've been given. In the Highlands and Islands in particular, we have a disproportionate number of small and micro businesses. Our dependence on the visitor economy also means that hospitality is the lifeblood of many of our communities. And my inbox will be like many's here, small businesses telling us that they're being expected to have to find thousands of pounds to pay their rates bills. That's money that will come directly out of the hands of small business people, of families and of communities across Scotland. And if I can briefly paraphrase a very famous sign, when you buy from a small business, you're not helping the CEO buy a third home. You're helping a child get dance lessons or a football shirt and helping their parents put food on the table or pay their mortgage. And the reverse is true because for many that's where this money will come from, if the business survives at all, because this comes at a time when the challenges of business couldn't be more pronounced. And ministers should be aware of the wider cost of their changes beyond simply the economic ones. Outside of the cities and large towns, hospitality businesses in particular are the traditional heart of rural communities across Scotland. We know the value that a good local high street or a village pub can bring to the well-being of our towns and villages, but around 300 pubs have closed their doors in Scotland in the last 5 years alone. A rate of closure the Scottish Beer and Pub Association suggests is 50% higher than in England. And we often talk in this chamber about things like place-based initiatives and building enduring communities and social engagement. But for many communities across the Highlands and Islands, the experience of recent years has been a hollowing out as premises shut down and promises of the high street evolving to match changing times give way to let signs. I haven't got time, I'm afraid. That will be the consequence of large hikes in business rates, and it will hit regions like mine hard, because it's rural businesses that routinely operate on tighter margins with lower footfall, with greater seasonal fluctuations, often with owners surviving on taking less out of the business to support themselves. Business groups have certainly been vocal on this issue. The Association of Scotland's Self-Caterers has spoken specifically about rural and island businesses being at breaking point. The Scottish Hospitality Group has said the sector cannot survive another tidal wave of unfathomable rates hikes. And if Richard Lockhead or Ivan McKee or Kate Forbes or even John Swinney think that these businesses and business groups are crying wolf, let them have the courage of their convictions and say that in this chamber. Yeah. Ministers should look at what has happened in the last 5 years, a pandemic that has cost so many businesses their stability and so many people their livelihoods. And it cost many their savings and the resilience that they built into their businesses to protect them from market trends and fluctuations and from behavioural change. But should they really have expected to have to protect their businesses from the impact of governments reckless to the impact of those decisions they make? Presiding Officer, government can never fully compensate for tougher economic times, but in those times it has a choice, to help or to turn a blind eye. More tax, more regulation, more red tape is the choice of this Scottish Government. But they do have an opportunity in the final month of this Parliament to turn it around. Now is the time to create some breathing space, pause re-evaluations and look seriously at what can be done to help businesses facing the prospect of massive rises in their bills.
Thank you, Mr Halker-Johnson. I now call Claire Adamson to be followed by Michael Mara.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. No one in this chamber underestimates the importance of Scotland's hospitality sector. These businesses breathe life into our communities, and as someone who is the convener of the Culture Committee, I know how they impact on the well-being of our communities and the support that they give. But the motion before us today risks unintended consequences for businesses and public services. Presiding Officer, this debate must also be seen in the context of serious pressures facing Scotland's nighttime economy. Late-night venues are operating in tight margins, facing rising energy costs, staffing pressures and changes in consumer behaviour. I just want to reflect that some of those issues are not within the gift of this Parliament to fix. The increase in employer contributions has had a dramatic impact on them, and also Brexit, as has been mentioned already, has a significant impact on the staffing availability as we are seeing fewer and fewer European nationals come to work in our working in our nighttime economies. This plan from the government, though, is targeted, sustainable and supports businesses. It is also worth comparing Scotland's approach with the rest of the UK, where hospitality businesses face higher rates, patchier relief and less certainty beyond short-term funding. The small business bonus has been mentioned already in the debate today, and Scotland is significantly higher in that support it gives to our businesses than in the rest of the UK. And Mr McKee has already shown the value of the £864 million relief that the government is putting in. No, thank you. The Scottish Government recognises these pressures, and that's precisely why the budget for 26-27 delivers those rate reliefs, a package of £864 million, benefiting around 96% of the retail hospitality. I'm not going to take an intervention. I've only got a 4-minute speech, thanks to the scheduling by the Conservatives. This is not a government sitting on its hand. It is a government reducing property rates, ahead of re-evaluation, delivering the lowest basic property rate since 2019, continuing the small business bonus scheme and guaranteeing certainty through transitional relief for the next 3 years. It provides crucial relief for the hospitality businesses, including 100% support in our islands and remote areas, saving ratepayers £322 million over the next re-evaluation period. We have to be honest about what a blanket postponement of re-evaluation would mean. Re-evaluation is an independent process, not one ministers can switch off for political convenience, and delaying it would create prolonged uncertainty for businesses, the very thing the sector has repeatedly told us it does not want to happen. That is why the Government has taken a more responsible approach by commissioning an independent review of valuation methodology for licensed hospitality properties that is already underway and will report later this year. The Government has already stated that any Barnett consequentials arising from the UK business rate support for pubs and live music venues will be passed on in full to the Scottish businesses, and ministers are actively seeking clarity from the UK Government on how much funding will be available and when it will materialise. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Addison. I now call Michael Mara to be followed by Stephen Kerr. Mr Mara.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scotland's hospitality businesses are a vital part of our economy. They're the lifeblood of our high streets and cornerstones of our communities, serving visitors and locals alike. In Dundee, it might be the V&A, Verdant Works, the Discovery, or our beautiful scenery that bring people to the city, but our excellent hospitality businesses are an essential part of any visit. And there's more to it than just economic value. In a society that seems ever more fragmented, these third spaces, the high street cafe, the local pub, the favourite restaurant, are essential to our sense of place and community. I think of Many's on the Perth Road, packed on a Friday night, with Dundonians sharing a drink in good company after a week of hard graft. And the importance of hospitality for our economy and our communities cannot be overstated. And that's why today's debate, if you let me just begin and make some progress, Mr Hoy, that's why today's debate is about more than the technical details of business rates. Governments have a responsibility to get those details right, to allow businesses to flourish and remain at the heart of their communities. Frankly, this SNP government seems determined to get it all wrong. From speaking to hospitality businesses across the North East, I know that the looming re-evaluation is a real cause of concern. I know that some businesses' rateable values will double or triple overnight, and the increases really are staggering, and for many businesses will be far too large to absorb. So Scottish Labour supports an immediate pause to the new rates revaluation and the extension of reliefs to retail, hospitality and leisure businesses. Yes.
Briefly, Craig Hoy.
I thank Mr Maher for taking the intervention, and I agree with much of what he said. But is he also aware that acute pressure is being put on the hospitality industry because of the changes to employers' national insurance contributions? And what representations has he made to the UK Government on this issue?
Michael Mara.
Well, Mr Hoy is correct in saying that businesses are absorbing the Employment's national insurance contribution increase. And the quid pro quo for that has been an additional £5.2 billion of funding for the Scottish Government. And it's the choices the Scottish Government makes about how they want to spend that money, whether they want to put in place the reliefs. The other thing that comes from the UK Government is obviously the system of reliefs that have been put in place across the UK. And we're yet to hear from the Government how they're going to pass that on, particularly to pubs that we've heard about in the last week. And I do welcome that announcement that there will be a 15% cut to new rates bills from April, followed by a 2-year real terms freeze in other parts of the UK. And the SNP Finance Secretary has said that she will pass on additional support, but we're yet to hear what that will actually mean. In 24-25 and 25, I'm sorry if I can make some progress. 25-26, the SNP failed to pass on rates relief from the UK Government in full, leaving many businesses on the brink when they had the funds to support them. Indeed, since July 2024, the actual increase for the Scottish Government's budget is £10.3 billion across the spending review. Failing to support our hospitality business is a choice from the Government. So the SNP must heed the strength of feeling from the hospitality sector, and this is an important important opportunity to raise those voices today before they do even more damage to one of the key sectors of our economy. We are committed, as Daniel Johnson has set out, to a fundamental overhaul of non-domestic rates on these benches. Tinkering around the edges will not cut it, and we are way past the point where it will work. From the calamity of the deposit return scheme, for repeated failure to pass on reliefs and refusal to reform rates, it's clear that only a change of government will actually deliver the change that businesses need in Scotland.
Thank you, Mr Mara. I now call Stephen Kerr to be followed by Keith Brown.
Well, the SNP's lack of interest in this subject is glaring. Three members, backbench members of the SNP, have bothered to turn up for this debate. I hope the people in the hospitality sector, the people that make their living in hospitality, will become aware of the lack of interest that this government has, the party of government has in their welfare. And frankly, I can't make up my mind whether it's disinterest on the part of the SNP, whether it's ignorance on the part of the SNP, whether it's willful destruction on the part of the SNP. Because, frankly, if you want an object lesson of a party that has been in government for too long, that's become insulated from reality, there it is in the form of the front bench of the SNP government. Everything that comes up in this chamber, everything that comes up that there's some responsibility on government for, it's always it's an independent body. It's someone else. It's nothing to do with the minister. Why do we have 25 ministers in this government? They're not responsible for anything. They're not responsible. Nothing lands on their desk. They do nothing about anything. It's always someone else's fault. This is a serious situation. An entire sector of the Scottish economy heading for the cliff edge. Hospitality in Scotland isn't facing a minor turn down. It's facing what its own sector leaders describe, without exaggeration, as brutal trading conditions. Around 7 in 10 hospitality businesses are reporting that they are in decline, actively considering closure. A majority expect to make a loss this year. Profitability has collapsed while costs have exploded. Those are not opposition politicians speaking. Those are not our talking points. That's what the sector is saying. And if the government can't hear what the sector is saying, they are being willfully negligent in their responsibilities as the government of this country. Give way to...
Briefly, Mr Connell.
Does Mr Kerr agree that we have to identify the individual businesses that are being affected by this, like the Cartvale pub and restaurant in my constituency, once derelict, taken over by a family who've built it up into a superb local business, employing 51 people whose jobs are at risk? That's more jobs at risk than there were members of the SNP turned up for their Eastwood Burns supper. Is that not a calamity for them, but a disaster for the country?
Stephen Kerr.
Well, Jackson Carlos sums it up beautifully. That's exactly it. This is not a sector that's asking for sympathy. They're pleading. They're pleading for their survival. And yet the SNP government's response, we've heard it again today, is just some more spineless tinkering at the edges. The sector's crystal clear. Leon Thompson of UK Hospitality Scotland warning that asking pubs and restaurants to find thousands of pounds more in rates within weeks bears no relation to the trading environment they're operating in. Stephen Montgomery at Scottish Hospitality Group has described the business rate system as broken, inflation-busting, unaffordable for hospitality, and has explicitly called for the revaluation to be paused. I could not understand Claire Adamson's speech. That's not a first time for me with Claire Adamson. When she said ministers can't stop this. Of course ministers can stop it. Of course ministers can stop it. The Northern Ireland Executive Minister, the Sinn Féin Minister that was referred to by Murdo Fraser, they have stopped it. So let's get real about this. Presiding Officer, these are not isolated voices. I didn't mention Colin Wilkinson of the Scottish Licensed Trade Association. He's warning there's never been so much uncertainty about the future of the licensed trade. These are not isolated voices. They're united, consistent, unequivocal. They're telling ministers that
Mr. Kerr, you'll need to bring your remarks to closure of your time.
Not work. And so I will conclude on time to please you, Presiding Officer.
Well, Mr Kerr, thank you very much. Thank you. And I will now call Keith Brown to be followed by Fergus Ewing. Keith Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think we are all agreed about the importance of the hospitality sector. I worked in the sector for a number of years.
Mr Brown, please resume seat. Mr Kerr, I did ask you to bring your remarks to a close. You then continued. You were over your time. I explained right... I'm speaking, Mr Kerr, at the moment. Please resume your seat. I'm speaking. I did do all that, and notwithstanding you continued, the latitude that has been given in the open debate has been about 8 seconds, 7 seconds. You got that. You didn't indicate you were stopping any time soon. I have to protect the rights of other members. I have to protect the rights of the rest of the day's business. That is what I'm doing. Further to the timetable that was proposed by your business manager, approved by the Bureau, and then subsequently ratified by the Parliament. Does Mr Kerr wish to make a point of order or not? Point of order, Stephen Kerr.
Point of order, because you've just taken longer than it would have taken me to read one more sentence in my speech to give me a lecture about timekeeping. When I was watching the clock very carefully, because I know how assiduous you are, Presiding Officer, got to the 4 minutes, it was seconds past, and you shut me down. I consider that, frankly, to be something that, as Presiding Officer, I thought you would want to extend some respect to the fact that I was trying to close my speech.
Mr Kerr, I think you're coming perilously close to breaching standing orders by challenging the authority of the Chair, and you might wish to reflect on that. I now would wish to continue with the Conservative Opposition Day debate. Number 1, I call Keith Brown, to be followed by Fergus Ewing. Mr Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. There is no doubt that we all agree on the importance of the hospitality sector. Myself, I worked in the sector for many years. Have a son who works in the pub sector locally as well. And it's no question that they are facing rising costs, staffing pressures and customers who, because of the cost of living, are having to watch every penny. We haven't heard so much about some of the causes. Brexit's been mentioned, I think, by one or two, in particular Claire Adamson, but it has a huge impact on the sector. The pandemic has a massive impact on the sector. In fact, it goes back as far as the financial crisis in 2008-2009. And more than that, the 15 years of austerity budgets that we've had since then and continue to have, as well as the massive waste of public funds through PPP under the Conservative government that we saw before, the absolutely appalling budget from Liz Truss that we saw as well, and, as has been mentioned by one or two members, the impact of national insurance contributions on the wages for many people that work in local government. I'm not taking any Conservative interventions, you wouldn't take one from me. And I don't agree that postponing revaluation or introducing blanket 100% relief up to £100,000 is the right answer, because when we look at the details, Scotland's already providing a level of targeted, guaranteed support that simply is not being matched elsewhere in these islands. The draft Scottish budget sets out a non-domestic rates relief package worth £864 million, which could benefit 96% of retail, hospitality and leisure businesses. Alongside revaluation on the 1st of April, the basic, intermediate and higher property rates are being reduced, delivering the lowest basic rate since 2018-19. There will also be transitional relief to smooth changes, and the small business bonus scheme is being continued for the next 3 years to give certainty. And specifically for this sector, for the next 3 years, there will be a 15% relief for eligible hospitality properties, paying the basic or intermediate rate capped at £110,000 per business. In our islands and designated remote areas, not a fact mentioned by a previous speaker from the islands, that relief is 100%. And taken together, around 89,000 properties, 96% of the sector, will pay zero or reduced rates across the revaluation period, saving ratepayers an estimated £322 million. So the issue here is not whether hospitality is being supported, it clearly is. The issue is whether we throw uncertainty into a live revaluation process and replace targeted support with a very broad, very expensive subsidy. And on the question of valuation methodology, the Scottish Government has listened to the licensed trade. An independent review led by Advocate Depute B.J. Gill and involving the sector is already underway and will report later this year to inform the 2029 revaluation. That is how you fix a system properly, without pulling the rug from under businesses in the middle of a revaluation cycle. But, Presiding Officer, we also have to be honest about where many of the pressures on hospitality are coming from. They are not coming from Holyrood, they are not coming from this Parliament, they are coming from Westminster. We have heard one mention of spiralling energy costs, something over which I have already said I won't take an intervention. We have already heard about the spiralling energy costs, the economic damage of Brexit, and now the UK Government's decision to increase employer national insurance contributions, as I have mentioned, both by lowering the threshold and raising the rate. A tax on jobs is estimated to cost businesses around £850 per employee and take over £2 billion out of the Scottish economy next year. There are the pressures squeezing our pubs, restaurants and hotels. And when members point to England and Wales, let's make that comparison properly. Down south, they are also going through revaluation on the 1st of April, but their system relies heavily on complex transitional schemes and shifting relief packages that hospitality groups themselves are criticising as inconsistent and skewed. Scotland, by contrast, is guaranteeing 3 years of relief, combining rate reductions, transitional protection, sector-specific relief and a small business bonus into one coherent package. For these reasons, I support the amendment in the name of Ivan McKee and support for hospitality in Scotland.
I now call Fergus Ewing up to 2 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, let me just get straight to the chase. The revaluation must be postponed. It can be postponed. Moreover, the Minister has been given detailed briefings by experts, Fiona Campbell and others, about how it can be postponed. Specific sectors can have it disapplied, or the methodology applied to specific sectors can be ordered to revert to that which applied before. In the case of self-catering, the assessor, without any warning, moved away from receipts and expenditure to rental. Well, there are only about 500 properties out of the 17,500 that have any rentals. It's absurd. The Valuation Office Agency, in a blog on 20th February 2023, said, and they're the assessors in England, this doesn't work, it's not appropriate. Why is he not using the powers available to him to disapply it to the self-catering sector and, I think, probably the pubs and hospitality sector? That needn't stop it for the rest. So I want to ask him a couple of specific questions. One, does he agree that because of the number of thousands of businesses that will close if he continues to do what he's planning to do and little more, then the tax take will reduce? So can I ask, will he publish his estimate of the impact of loss of businesses over the next few years on the tax take? He must publish these figures, Presiding Officer, I believe. He should publish these figures if he does believe in transparency. I haven't got the time. I've got 2 minutes.
There's no time for intervention.
I've got 2 minutes. I've got 2 minutes. Goodness sake.
Minister,
you can answer your time later.
Minister, please resume your seat. Mr Ewing.
Well, I hope I get the time back.
You won't.
Oh. Well, the other thing I think that should be done is to estimate the difference between the tax take if it goes ahead and the tax take if it reverts to 223 revaluations. And again, that should be made public. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, this is nothing to do with Brexit. It's nobody else's fault. It's a homegrown disaster, a home-brewed disaster, but it is not too late to avert that disaster.
Thank you, Mr Ewing. Thank you. We will now move to closing speeches. I call on Willie Rennie to close on behalf of the Scottish Liberal Democrats. Up to 4 minutes, please.
If it's any comfort to Mr Ewing, I've got 3 older sisters and I've faced that experience.
Mr Rennie, I would advise caution here.
But sometimes the shortest contributions are the best, because I think Fergus Ewing just got to the nub of it, about what practical action is required. And it's really important that the government understands, and also the backbenchers, that OK, it's reasonable to say there's energy costs going up, that the Brexit has had an impact, the pandemic's had an impact, that perhaps the employers' national insurance contributions has had an impact. All of that is true, and it's not unreasonable, as Mr Brown pointed out, to make those points. But the businesses are still in the same place as they are after those speeches, and they need practical action to solve a problem that's facing them today. And that's why I think the more that the Minister digs in, the more furious the sector will get. And that's why we do need a government that actually is flexible enough to reflect the problem that businesses are actually facing. Rather than pointing elsewhere, they need to take the action now, here at home. And Michael Murray, I thought, painted a very powerful, evocative image of the Dundee pubs, the hospitality, the restaurants, where people, after a hard week at work, were able to enjoy themselves. The soul of the community is partly what we're talking about here. It's not just the advert to the world that I was talking about, but it's about the soul, the kind of the heart of communities. And they are facing staggering rises, and that way of life is potentially put under threat. So the threat is real. Now, Jimmy Halcrow-Johnson was right to talk about short-term lets, the work that the Association of Self-Caterers has done, the fact that they have been working in detailed, hard work with the assessor to try and meet the deadline of the 19th of February to change the practice notes that might deliver some practical improvements right now. But there needs to be a review as to whether moving from the long-standing receipts and expenditure model through to that from the rental-based or to the rental-based model is the right thing to do, because that's resulted in colossal increases that need to be changed. Now, if I can make an offer to the Minister, we've still got the stage 1 of the budget coming up in a week's time, and I know that we will have further talks between my colleagues and the Ministers. We are prepared to have a discussion about further measures that can be introduced in that budget in order to help this sector. And if he's prepared to do that, we would be more encouraged to vote for the budget at the end of the process. But we need to see movement. We need to see real movement for something that will have a dramatic economic impact. So that's a genuine offer to the Minister that he's prepared to move further. We will be prepared to consider voting for the budget. Yes, we'll take an intervention.
Minister, briefly.
Yes, I'll take
Minister, briefly.
I'm happy to engage as always, and I look forward to him coming forward with proposals as to what further support he wants to give in terms of NDR relief and where that money is coming from.
Willie Rennie.
Well, I appreciate that approach, because we do need to get down, move beyond the rhetoric and get to practical action that will make a real difference. So if the Minister's prepared to do that, we will enter into those discussions in good faith and try to reach some kind of agreement. And I hope the other parties will be able to do the same, because this stuff really matters in terms of our communities and also in terms of our jobs. But budget action will not be enough. We do need structural change, and we do need to take the opportunity of what I propose as a pause to get that structural change, so that we don't have to come back here every single time we have revaluations.
Thank you, Mr Rennie. I now call on Lorna Slater to close on behalf of the Scottish Greens. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Our rate system can and should be made fair. Currently, our small business rates relief scheme goes to businesses that are anything but small, because we use a totally unfit definition of small. It needs to be overhauled into a fairer system where big businesses pay more according to their ability to pay. This would allow us to target rates relief to smaller local businesses like hospitality businesses, supporting our high streets and our rural communities. For example, why do we give rates relief to businesses who use unfair labour practices? Non-domestic rates and council tax are, however brokenly, still essentially property taxes. And reform of property tax has been a long-standing priority for the Scottish Greens. We have made the case for a unified system between residential and non-residential property taxes, with our preference being for a tax based on land values. And we should be using our devolved powers to set property tax rates for domestic and non-domestic properties that are right for Scotland, that are in line with our vision for a fairer and greener Scotland, and that help us implement our wider social, environmental and place-based policies, as other members have suggested. The next Scottish Government, elected in May, will have the opportunity to fundamentally reshape taxation in Scotland and finally overhaul the long-broken council tax and to combine it with the non-domestic rate system in a unified, progressive and sustainable property taxation system, to put our public services on a sound financial footing and to tackle inequality. And it is absolutely vital that they do so. We have been limping along for far too long with this system that has unfairness and lack of transparency, as members have said, baked right into it, and it isn't working well for anyone. It's time, and it's past time, for that radical reform that Willie Rennie has called for, as well as the Scottish Greens. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Slater. And I call on Daniel Johnson to close on behalf of Scottish Labour. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I have to say I find Lorna Slater's position in this debate somewhat difficult to follow, because she's right. This is an unfair system. It lacks transparency, and too many businesses, almost at every revaluation round, end up with increases in rateable values which just don't reflect the business conditions either they or their contemporary or their peer businesses face. And indeed, I think one of the points in this debate is highlighted by the fact that Lorna Slater, in her opening contribution, said that this is fair because it relies on rateable value. Rateable values are a synthetic figure arrived at by assessors, by methodologies that we can't interrogate. And actually, if you do get to see the methodologies, you see they are essentially made up. I've seen how a rates bill was calculated when I was facing a big increase, and literally there were arbitrary inflators and deflators for different areas of my shop floor arbitrarily arrived at. And I think Rachel Hamilton was absolutely right to ask about the methodology used for hospitality, because it is different. And actually, ultimately, and actually at the heart of this, beyond, I think, the idiosyncrasies and the issues that we face with this revaluation, is the fact that actually the way that RV is calculated for hospitality businesses is a disincentive to investment. You invest in your premise, you increase its capacity for customers, and you will get a bigger bill. Now, that doesn't make sense. So at the heart of this is the fact that there is a system here that, particularly for hospitality, arrives at inexplicable increases in rates bills for businesses, both for individual businesses, but actually, I think, whole sectors. And I think that both Stephen Kerr and indeed Fergus Ewing were right about two important things, is that ministers must take responsibility. Ultimately, assessors are accountable, assessors can be directed by them. There are powers, and to contradict Claire Adamson, it is untrue that they can't intervene, because Scottish ministers have intervened in the past, delaying the introduction of revaluations. And most importantly, we do have to make the comparison. We need to delve into the figures. But I don't understand the values that the government has arrived at, the value of the package, because if you look at the substantive benefits that are available south of the border, the fact is that the reliefs are available for businesses with rateable values up to £100,000, in contrast with up to £51,000 in Scotland. Furthermore, there is a much more prolonged period of introduction and tapering. And so, I mean, genuinely, I would be interested to understand the analysis, because just to reflect on the interaction between Ivan McKee and Willie, I think this is too important an issue just to toss figures around. I mean, I would be interested in sitting down and looking at what can be done, because I think when businesses, in particular businesses, are facing 200, 300, 400% increases, we have to get this right, because I am in... I'm in very brief, I'm in my last minute.
About these big percentages, but he absolutely has to recognise the fact that the whole point of the £864 million of reliefs is precisely to stop businesses experiencing those increases which are capped.
Sure, but for those particular businesses, a 15% discount on the increased bill, which is increased by 300%, the Minister is shaking his head, and we can happy to go through, but those reliefs won't essentially do the work that we need to be done to save those businesses, because it will be existential for many of them. So we need reform. We need to pause this, but we also need to overhaul how rates works and its transparency and its accountability, because we can't keep doing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Johnson. I now call on Cabinet Secretary Shona Robertson to close on behalf of the Scottish Government. Up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. So let me start by reiterating the commitment that I have made previously to pass on in full any consequentials following the Chancellor's announcement on relief to pubs and music venues in England to provide further support to business in Scotland. Now, clearly there are choices about how that is done, and the Minister for Public Finance met with the Non-Domestic Rates Consultative Group immediately after the budget was published in January, and is meeting that group again tomorrow. And I'm sure members will understand that there may be differing views of where that additional support should go. So it's important that we hear the views of people who are directly affected. I want to come back to a couple of points that have been made in the debate. I want to, first of all, correct something Daniel Johnson said, because the RHL relief, the 15%, is up to 100,000 in terms of what we've put in place. So the package of 130 million in addition to the transitional relief, in addition to the RHL relief package, that 320 million, the RHL part of it is 15%, but up to a value of 100,000. A couple of other things I want to correct that have been said as well. the number of businesses in accommodation and food services, i.e. the hospitality sector in Scotland, actually increased, not decreased, in the year to Q3 2025. Now, that is not to diminish any of the issues that have been raised, because we know there are issues, which is why we have put in place that package of £320 million, part of the wider package of £864 million of supports. And the other point I want to make, I will in a second, the other point I want to make is about some of the comparisons that have been made about north and south of the border, because the average increase in England for pubs is 30%. In Northern Ireland, it's 47%. In Scotland, it is 15%. So there are markedly different average increases for pubs across these islands, which, of course, that is, again, not to diminish the impact. That is why we're putting in the relief package that we are putting in. I'll give way to Craig Hoy.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for giving way. If the Scottish Government is providing such a generous package of support for Scotland's pubs, why is Sir Tom Hunter recommending to publicans across Scotland to bar Scottish ministers from the premises? Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm sure Tom Hunter will welcome the additional supports that we will put in place to support the sector, because it is important that we address the concerns that have been raised. We have already gone some way to do that with the 15% RHL reliefs. The transitional relief is a substantial package, all in all £320 million, part of an £864 million package. I also would say that delaying, I don't believe, is the answer, because not only is it, well, first and foremost, it would be unfair on the 40,000 properties which are expected to see a decrease in their rateable value. So by delaying is essentially going to push the problem down the road, and there will always be winners and losers in a revaluation. The importance, though, is that the relief package we're putting in place will help those businesses most impacted to smooth out that additional cost that the independent assessors, supported by Murdo Fraser and Mr Simpson, Mr Burnett, many others across this chamber, when we debated the Non-Domestic Rates Scotland Bill. So I am committed to supporting businesses, which is why our budget, which I do hope people will vote for, because without it nobody gets any reliefs and supports, that budget offers more than £320 million of support through transitional relief schemes and retail, hospitality and leisure relief over the next 3 years, not 1 year but 3 years, so that they have that continuity. In terms of, I want to end on the point that Willie Rennie made. I think Willie Rennie made a very, as always, very sensible, measured contribution, and I am more than happy to discuss with him and any other sensible voices, not too many in this chamber this afternoon, but Willie Rennie is one of those, around how we can go further in supporting
Cabinet Secretary, you need to conclude.
In supporting the sector, because there are choices to be made.
Yes,
there,
thank you.
And happy to
thank you,
have
Cabinet
that
Secretary.
further
And I
engagement.
now call on Rachel Hamilton to close on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I agree with Stephen Kerr. What a disappointment it was to see only 3 backbenchers here earlier. They obviously got the text, because now there's an extra 3. But for those of you who have worked in hospitality, good to hear that Keith Brown has worked in hospitality. Good on you. It's an excellent career. I've pulled a few pints in my time, I can say that, and I draw members to my register of interests. My husband has a pub. Has the SNP noticed they are hammering the last nail in the coffin of Scottish pubs? My colleague Murdo Fraser describes this situation as catastrophic. SNP demands of hospitality are as relentless as a rising tide. And I'm so pleased that the Scottish Conservatives, the party of common sense, are using their debate time to bring this to the chamber. Jamie Halcrow-Johnson, he's been listening to businesses. He understands that they cannot absorb any more pressures on their sector. And I want to tell you about a local husband and wife team. And for the record, I'd like to tell Lorna Slater that it's not little guys with little businesses, it's big girls with big businesses. And they are proud owners. They're a husband and wife team. They have a hotel, it's been in their family for 55 years. They are determined to reach their 60th anniversary. But with all the closures in hospitality, it's proving tricky for them to remain optimistic. They're willing to put in the long hours for very little return, because it's their loyal and dedicated employees that they put first. They say, Rachel Reeves, the NHI uplift alone represents 40k off their bottom line. And thanks to Keir Starmer, duty on beer and wine has increased. Add to this headwinds, increasing costs, ingredients, meat, fish, dairy, coffee. And now, thanks to the SNP, non-domestic rates for valuation will impose a further crippling rise. Business rates will rise for them from 85,000 to 115,000. That's an extra 15k payable per year. They're not exactly sure what they get for their rates, and they'd like to know. They'd like to know what they get for their rates. And on average, businesses in Scotland are facing an 86% rise. Then there's the question of why a small to medium enterprise in hospitality... Yeah, just in a second. Then there's the question of why an SME, because it has a large turnover and a low profit margin. As Daniel Johnson, who has run a business, recognises, it's the people who are running the businesses who actually know what they're doing, and they recognise that it is a completely unfair methodology, how it is calculated and how it is very different and unfair to other sectors. Something that the decision-makers here at the front bench clearly do not understand. I'll take the intervention.
Yeah, and just to correct Rachel Hamilton, the average increase for businesses in Scotland in terms of rateable value is 12.2% spread over 3 years, not the 80-odd% she's talking about. And that compares to more than 19% increase south of the border.
Rachel Hamilton.
But hospitality businesses are facing some of the increases up to 300%. Yeah. The Minister needs to look at the stats because he clearly doesn't understand them. Now, let's hear what the industry thinks. Leon Thompson of UK Hospitality says that without action, we'll only see business closures accelerate. More jobs lost. No thanks. No thanks, Minister. Maybe in a minute.
Minister.
And Scottish communities continue to see the loss of much-loved local venues. Stephen Montgomery, Director of Scottish Hospitality Groups. Hospitality is the absolute backbone of Scotland's communities and high streets, but it cannot survive another tidal wave and unaffordable rates hikes. Now, let's look at Claire Adamson's constituency. The Electric Bar in Motherwell, rateable value moving from 26,250 to 45,250. That's nearly double. Have you spoken to them, Miss Adamson? Now let's look at Shona Robeson's constituency in Dundee. The Barrel Man, revaluation, pre-revaluation, 38,200. The new RV, 68,700. Has the Cabinet Secretary spoken to them to see how that impact is going to be on their bottom line and possible job closures? So, we know that doing business in Scotland overall is more costly than the rest of the UK. Doing business in Scotland is the highest on record and the tax burden higher than the UK average. Just let that sink in as we debate these new revaluations. Let's assess the operating environment in Scotland. Or can we? Because the SNP dropped this tourism ministerial role. And as Willie Rennie said, the First Minister said he wanted to reset the relationship with business. The SNP's new deal for business is stale. It's been stuck in the cupboard and it's gone mouldy. The non-domestic rate system for retail, hospitality and leisure is unfair. Fergus Ewing says, please publish how much the tax take is going to be. How sensible would that be? Come and join us. You are the party of common sense, Fergus Ewing. We want to see urgent action on the current methodology of revaluation. This is, as has been clear as day, in the hands of the Minister. They set the framework and ultimately we want to see the SNP postpone the revaluation like Northern Ireland Assembly. We need action now. Labour, Lib Dems and Fergus Ewing agree with us. An SSI could be brought forward to delay the revaluation. Yep. Hiding behind the independent function of the assessors is frankly shameful. It's shameful because hundreds of businesses are going to go out of business and close. And we need to see action from this government.
Thank you, Ms Hamilton. That concludes the debate on saving Scottish hospitality, and there'll be a short pause before we move on to the next item of business. Is there a point of order? Daniel Johnson.
Can I just acknowledge the error I made in the figures? I was quoting a previous threshold, and I just wanted to acknowledge that there is opportunity.
Thank you, Mr Johnson. That's not a point of order, but the matter will be noted on the record. And as I say, there will be a short pause before we move on to the next item of business. Thank you.